we're going to pay some attention to how Virgil himself thought about myth in the class. This is another one of those questions that if we tried to ask it of Homer or of the tragedians, we wouldn't get much in the way of an answer. We'd be pretty much stuck on what they thought myth was all about. When we turn to Virgil, though, we have actual good evidence for certain kinds of ways he understood myth to work. We know, for example, that Virgil has a linkage with this large tradition of interpretation of Homer. He's a scholar poet. Yes, he's very much an artist, a poet of the first order, but he is at the same time an extremely learned person that is not just familiar with the traditions that he's writing and rewriting, he's also familiar with the traditions of commentary on Homer. And that gives him a rich context in which to remake the traditions that are coming his way, and gives us a window onto what Virgil himself was up to as a creator of myth. We can say for sure that Virgil has a strong rationalizing impulse to him. We'll see that when we get to strange, wondrous, mystical kinds of events, Virgil will typically provide us with a redundant kind of causation for those strange or mystical events. So for example, the falling in love scene we'll see at the close of Book 1, where Venus decides to weaken Dido by making her fall desperately in love with Aeneas, the point where the arts of love are actually used for terrible things. Well, that happens in myth, doesn't it? Love is hardly a soft and squishy, gentle kind of force. It's something that can undo a person. Well, it definitely happens to Dido. Venus then comes in and has Dido fall desperately in love with Aeneas. But in order to do so, she uses her son, Amor, who also will be known later as Cupid. And specifically, as Virgil tells the story, what Venus does is reshape her young son, Amor, into the shape of the actual young infant son of Aeneas, Ascanius. So now you've got this picture that Virgil's painting for you that talks about, on the one hand, a goddess in a powerful act of divine intervention, making a woman fall in love with a man. But on the other hand, he does it through a surrogate that takes the shape of a young infant. Now, I don't know that this is absolutely true. I won't call this a universal law, but let's go ahead and label something that I've observed in my lifetime called the puppy effect. If someone would like a person, someone else to have an amorous attraction to them, having a puppy on your lap is not a bad thing. It means that you can exhibit to the person, yeah, the puppy automatically melts a person's heart and makes the person think, oh, wow, that's so cute, and want to come over and pat it. And then also, if that person who has the puppy on his or her lap can actually take care of this little thing, well, chances are maybe the person might be a good person to have around in a longer term relationship. So puppies are useful ways of getting people's attention and expressing to them some sense that you yourself might be kind of have your act together enough to care for something else, so you might be a worthy mate for that person. Well, the way Virgil tells the story, having Ascanius be the object that makes Dido turn from just sort of admiring in the abstract this figure of Aeneas to falling passionately, deeply in love with him is kind of interesting. There's a psychologizing of the whole event that I think Virgil's engaged in, having Dido in an example of this puppy effect, seeing this young infant and thinking, well, wow, this person might just be okay, and having that be the vehicle by which passionate love falls upon her is a sense of, I think, Virgil giving us a redundant set of causations for an otherwise rather grandiose kind of divine intervention. We'll see later on in the story some mention in Book 3 of Aeneas's household gods. They're someone that are going to show up in this story over and over again. In fact, he has a dream about them telling him that it's important that he should leave Crete now that there's a plague, and he should go off and try to found his city somewhere else. Aeneas is thinking about Crete as a possible place to begin his new city. He gets started on things, and then these household gods come and tell him to go away. Now, the appearance of the gods to a person, that's pretty citing mythic kinds of stuff, but look what Vergil's done with it. He casts it in the form of a dream. So we now have Aeneas imagining something to happen, which gives us another kind of psychological way of understanding what happens. And then also the pestilence that gets visited upon the group means that they're going to have to leave Crete anyway. So the moving away from Crete and abandoning that place as a potential site for a future Rome is determined by the pestilence, yes, in a physiological kind of way. It's also determined by a dream, which could be looked at as a psychological reality or maybe as a divine visitation. It's also cast in Vergil as a pure and simple divine visitation. All of these are present there. There's a redundant set of causes that's given for the action, some more mystical than others, in a typical kind of Vergilian move. The connections also of the gods and what they mean are slightly changed in Vergil's story. When we hear about Jupiter, he's going to be at quite a grand remove from most of the events that happen in the story. This is a little bit different from Zeus, who gets his hands dirty and goes ahead and threatens people and sends messengers and all the kind of actual action that we see Zeus engaging in. Jupiter's much more removed and grand and farther out. There's an association that Vergil's building on here of the highest god, Jupiter, with the highest levels of the cosmos. The Romans would have known this by a Greek term, aether. The very highest reaches of the cosmos are the places that Jupiter is associated with, and that's where he stays. He mostly doesn't come down. We're not going to see the kinds of rough and tumble examples of Jupiter being involved in the action that Homer went ahead and did. Another interesting example of this is this figure, Juno. We're going to get to know Juno pretty well through the story, and Vergil has a particular spin on her. Remember how he talks about her at the very beginning, talking about how Aeneas is buffeted by blows from the air directed by Juno at him. Fair enough, fine, and as we're reading it, he sort of weaves this all together, makes perfect sense, but we'll see that when Juno becomes involved in events down below the earth, she typically is going to get involved as a storm goddess. She'll blow winds at Aeneas, she'll blow awful storms at him. He'll be pressed around by actual physical storms that are now directed by Juno. Okay, fine, we know gods get involved in this, but the trick is, in the Greek materials, Hera is not a storm goddess. She doesn't show up sending storms at people. Poseidon surely does, Zeus can do it, but it's not normally Hera's way of doing things. Since when is the queen of the gods a storm goddess? Well, Vergil is working from a tradition that draws on Greek scholarly work, and in fact on a long and deep allegorical reading of the goddess Hera as being associated with the weather. The Greek term for Hera, there I have written up on the board next to the English term Hera there in Greek characters, has an eta, a rho, and an alpha. Eta is a long E. And the H that shows up in English is taken care of in Greek by that little squiggly mark up above the, that little squiggly mark there up above the eta. Hera is her name there in Greek. Well, the Greeks noticed soon enough that this was actually an anagram for the straightforward Greek word for air. Aer is the dense air of our atmosphere around us. And they said to themselves, well, Hera's letters, actually, if you unscramble them, make her associated with our understanding of the air. So from early on, Greek allegorists read Hera as an allegorical symbol of the air. Now they also thought, according to the science of the day, that the air was responsible for the weather. And if it got heated up or got moist or all those things that we had crashes of thunder, we had winds, we had hot winds, cold winds, we had all the meteorological phenomena, including storms and blowing, were built into this lower atmosphere of air. So when Vergil is carefully talking about Juno as a storm god, what he's doing is working from a long and deep allegorical tradition that had for many centuries associated Hera with the air. Now, does Homer do this? Well, mostly not. Homer's interpreters do, and Vergil is working from this tradition, from the traditional scholarship around Homer's interpreters. We'll see in Vergil's pantheon that not only do we have the grand and separate and very far away Olympian divinities, especially in the case of Jupiter, we're also going to have these figures, the household gods. These are going to be effigies, actual statues, that are the local gods of particular families, a very Roman custom, not a Greek one at all. These are going to be very important for Vergil's story, and they're a kind of concretization of abstract divine forces in the form of specific effigies that people can direct their acts of worship toward. Another kind of indication from Vergil that he's dealing in, yes, abstractions, but those abstractions are going to be made concrete. We'll notice also that in furthering of this rationalizing spirit, we're going to have actual real place names built into our story. Vergil's story is entirely mappable. It's mappable on specific locations in the Mediterranean. When we looked at Homer's Odyssey, we didn't propose any mapping there because, in fact, all mappings of the Odyssey are the creations of the map makers. Homer doesn't give us any settled atlas. There are lots of people that spend cottage industries of time disagreeing over which mapping should go where and whether the Scylla and Charybdis is in one place of the Mediterranean and the Pillars of Hercules is somewhere else. But mostly Odysseus's Homer's treatment of this area is as a land of mythic fantasy. It's strange and wonderful places, but you can't really find them in any specific way on maps. Totally different with Vergil. Every place he's going to talk about is specifically mappable onto real geography that you and I, as classical Romans, know. We're going to get to know we know these places from having grown up. We may have visited them. Vergil's now mapping myth onto real historical places. Now, we're going to see some other treatments that we'll spend time looking at. Vergil, where he will give his rationalizing impulse will take over. And at each of these points, we'll link it back to this new sense of myth in history that Vergil's working with. He is working in an historical time with great learning around him, and he's not going to ignore that in building his own myth. And yet, Vergil is able, even within this very learned time, historically and scientifically, with great records everywhere, Vergil still is going to be able to construct myth. It's much trickier to do it within history. I think you'll agree Vergil succeeds with great effect.